The day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates was the same day I became its most powerful. It all started with a $500 fine. That's what Karen Wellington and her homeowners association charged me for the crime of fishing with my grieving daughter. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined, was that I had 4 million reasons to fight back and enough cold, calculated spite to use every single one of them. If you're watching this from your phone in the bathroom, desperately escaping the soul-crushing monotony of your own HOA meeting, then drop a comment and tell me where you're hiding. I promise you, this story will be worth the risk. My name is Remy Thornfra. Until 2 months ago, I was living what most people would call the American dream. I'd spent 15 grueling years building a career in venture capital and financial investment, navigating the high-stakes world of tech startups until I'd finally sold my stakes for a sum large enough to retire at 42. But life has a brutal way of reminding you that your bank account is no shield against real tragedy. My wife, Rachel, her long, courageous battle with cancer ended last year, leaving me alone to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Celine. The grief was a physical weight, a darkness that threatened to consume us both. The only flicker of light, the only activity that seemed to offer any solace, was fishing. It was the last thing the three of us had done together. A perfect, quiet day on the water before Rachel's health took its final, devastating turn. So when I decided we needed a clean start, a new place to begin the painful process of healing, I looked specifically for a home near water, somewhere peaceful, somewhere we could feel close to Rachel's memory. The Lakeside Estates community seemed to be that perfect place on paper. Upscale homes, excellent schools, and right in the heart of the development, a beautiful, serene 6-acre lake. The realtor did mention there was a homeowners association, of course, but she brushed it off as standard fare: lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, the usual mundane details. I should have recognized the warning sign when she hesitated, her voice dipping slightly before adding, "The HOA President, Karen Wellington, is very dedicated to maintaining property values." I dismissed it. In my career, I'd negotiated with billionaires and broken up boardroom brawls. How much trouble could one neighborhood bureaucrat possibly be? I discovered the answer to that question on a quiet, overcast Saturday morning in April. Celine and I had been at the community lake for about an hour, sitting on the small wooden dock, our lines cast into the still water. It was the first time in weeks I had seen a genuine, unforced smile on my daughter's face. She'd just carefully reeled in her second bluegill and was concentrating intensely on unhooking the small, shimmering fish when a voice, sharp and utterly devoid of warmth, sliced through the morning's peace. "Excuse me. What exactly do you think you're doing?" The woman marching toward us was in her late 50s, dressed in impeccably clean, expensive-looking athleisure wear. Her highlighted blonde hair was styled into that specific, sharp-angled bob I can only describe as the universal "I demand to speak to the manager" haircut. She carried a tablet like a shield and wore an expression of pure, unadulterated disapproval, as if she had just caught us spray-painting graffiti on a monument. "Good morning," I replied, forcing my voice to remain friendly. "Just enjoying some fishing with my daughter." I extended my hand. "I'm Remy Thornfra. We moved into the house on Sycamore Drive a couple months back." She completely ignored my outstretched hand, instead tapping with aggressive precision on her tablet screen. "Mr. Thornfra, fishing is explicitly prohibited in our community lake. This is a direct violation of HOA regulations." She delivered her next line with the gravitas of a royal proclamation. "I'm Karen Wellington, HOA President. I'll have to issue a violation notice. The fine is $500. I felt Celine flinch beside me. "There must be some misunderstanding," I said, my calm tone starting to strain. The realtor specifically mentioned fishing as one of the community's amenities. It was a major selling point for us. Karen's lips stretched into a thin, humorless smile that never reached her cold eyes. "That regulation was amended last month. All residents were notified via email. Ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from following them." She pivoted her tablet to show me a document titled "Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake." The date stamped. On it was from just 4 weeks prior. We never received any notification. "About this," I protested, a heat beginning to build in my chest. "I personally oversee all communications." The email was sent to every household, Karen stated with an infuriating absolute certainty. Perhaps you should check your spam folder, though I can't be responsible for residents who don't bother to read official communications. I took a slow breath, my jaw tightening. May I ask why fishing was suddenly banned? This lake is clearly stocked with fish. I gestured toward the water, where I could see the dark shapes of several decent-sized bass cruising near the weed beds along the shore. Karen's gaze swept over our simple fishing rods and small tackle box with palpable disdain. Environmental and safety concerns. The hooks can injure wildlife, and we've had complaints about the smell of fish and bait disturbing residents who are trying to enjoy the lake views from their homes. She looked pointedly at our gear. Not everyone wants to see this sort of activity while they're having their morning coffee on their patios. There was something in her tone, a specific kind of condescension, that made me really look at her. The way her eyes assessed our modest equipment, the slight curl of her lip. This wasn't about rules or environmentalism. This was about something else entirely. We're being very careful, I insisted, my arm instinctively moving around Selene's shoulders. We only practice catch and release, and we always clean up everything when we're done. We don't leave a trace. Karen's expression hardened into something unyielding. Mr. Thornfra, perhaps you don't fully understand how things work here at Lakeside Estates. We maintain certain standards in this community. This isn't a public fishing hole. The residents who have lived here for years expect a particular atmosphere. Her eyes flicked to Selene, then back to me. New residents sometimes struggle to adapt to our community culture. People who are more accustomed to, shall we say, different types of neighborhoods. The subtext was no longer subtext. It was a clear, ugly message, and I felt a surge of pure anger ignite in my gut. I was about to unleash a response when I heard a small, choked sniffle beside me. Selene had tears welling in her eyes. This spot, this quiet dock, was supposed to be our sanctuary, a place where for just a little while she could forget the gaping hole her mother had left in our lives. And this woman, with her petty tyranny and veiled insults, was systematically destroying it. We'll pack up, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Please email me the details of the fine and the full updated regulations. Karen's smile returned, this time full of victory. Excellent. I'm glad we understand each other. And do check your email more carefully in the future, Mr. Thornfra. We wouldn't want any further misunderstandings. With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, her pristine designer sneakers making no sound on the perfectly manicured grass. As we gathered our rods and tackle box, Selene wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Dad, why was that lady so mean? We weren't hurting anything. I didn't have a good answer for her, not one I could voice to a 14-year-old. Some people just like rules more than they like people, sweetheart, I said finally, my heart aching. Let's go home and have some lunch. Later that day, after scouring my email inbox and spam folder and finding no notification about any fishing ban, I began a deep dive into our HOA's documents and online presence. What I uncovered was revealing. Karen Wellington had been the HOA President for 8 consecutive years. Her day job? Owner of a small but exclusive real estate company that specialized in luxury community properties. I also stumbled upon several of her own social media posts, showing her hosting elaborate waterfront parties at that very same lake. These events featured alcohol, loud music, and large groups, apparently exempt from the concerns about disturbing the atmosphere that applied to a father and daughter fishing. Most importantly, buried deep in the HOA's founding documents was a critical clause. The lake was listed as a common property amenity belonging to all residents, but it was actually owned by Meridian Development Corporation, the original developers. The HOA merely held a recreational use lease. There was no legal basis for the kind of absolute control Karen was asserting. That evening, looking out my window, I saw Karen and a group of her friends gathered at the lakeside gazebo, wine glasses in hand, laughing loudly. So, they want to play the rules game, I thought, a cold determination settling over me. Fine, but first, I need to find out who really owns this water. The next morning, I met an older gentleman walking a friendly-looking golden retriever past my house. He introduced himself as Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney who lived 3 doors down. When I mentioned my run-in with Karen, his friendly demeanor instantly darkened. "Ah, you've met our neighborhood dictator," he said with a grimace. "Let me guess, she quoted some obscure regulation and issued a fine." When I nodded, he shook his head in disgust. "She's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Most people just pay the fines and keep their heads down to avoid the hassle." He glanced around conspiratorially and lowered his voice. "If you're interested in some background, come by for coffee sometime. I've got quite a collection of HOA horror stories." I took him up on his offer that afternoon. Merrick's home was a comfortable, book-filled space with walls lined with legal texts and framed photographs. Over cups of exceptionally strong coffee, he laid out the community's power structure. "Here's what most residents don't realize," Merrick explained, opening a thick folder of documents. "The lake isn't actually owned by the HOA, it's owned by Meridian Development. They leased the recreational rights to the HOA for a 30-year term, which is how Karen and the board can set usage rules." He tapped a specific page where a date was highlighted. "But that lease expires in less than 2 months. This immediately seized my attention. What happens then? Technically, Meridian could renew the lease, sell the lake to the HOA, or find another buyer entirely. Most residents are completely oblivious. They just assume the HOA owns everything." Merrick leaned forward, his expression intense. "But here's the interesting part. I've heard through some old contacts that Meridian is in serious financial trouble and is looking to liquidate assets fast. And our friend Karen knows it. For the next hour, we pored over public records and property databases. A disturbing pattern emerged of manipulative behavior that went far beyond simple rule enforcement. Through a network of shell companies linked to her real estate business, Karen had been quietly acquiring properties throughout Lakeside Estates whenever residents were forced to sell, often after being driven out by a relentless barrage of excessive HOA fines and violations. And now she's after the big prize," Merrick concluded. "From what I've gathered, she's in private talks with Meridian to purchase the lake property herself. Not for the HOA, mind you, but for her own company. The word is she plans to reduce public access and build a handful of luxury homes on part of the shoreline." Suddenly, the fishing ban made perfect, cynical sense. It had nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with gradually conditioning the community to restricted access, paving the way for a private takeover. Merrick then introduced me to another key ally, Samuel Washington, a retired bank owner and one of the few residents who openly challenged Karen's authority. Samuel, an elegant African-American man in his 60s, had experienced Karen's subtle discrimination firsthand. Samuel invited us to his impeccably kept home that evening, where he revealed a meticulously maintained digital database tracking a decade of HOA activities. "I started this as a simple record-keeping exercise," he explained, gesturing to the spreadsheets and charts on his large monitor. But it quickly revealed a very clear pattern in Karen's enforcement actions. The data was stark and undeniable. Homeowners of color received violation notices at nearly 3 times the rate of their white neighbors. Newer residents were cited for infractions that long-standing homeowners committed with impunity. And most tellingly, properties that eventually sold at depressed prices due to compliance issues frequently ended up being purchased by shell companies that all traced back, through a convoluted paper trail, to Wellington properties. "Her operation is clever," Samuel explained, pulling up a complex chart of corporate ownership. "She never purchases directly. It's always through LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties. They all ultimately lead back to her, but the structure is opaque enough to provide plausible deniability." He showed me records of 6 different homes purchased this way over 5 years, all following the same pattern: targeted violations, plummeting property values, a distressed sale, and then a lucrative resale after minor renovations. Merrick nodded grimly. "The lake is her endgame. Meridian overextended on a commercial project that collapsed during the pandemic. They're desperate for cash. That lake was never intended to be permanent green space. The original plans from 30 years ago included lakefront condos, but environmental regulations blocked it back then. Those regulations have since been relaxed," Samuel added, With the right connections at City Hall, which Karen definitely has, permits for limited development could be pushed through. A half-dozen luxury lakefront homes could easily net $7 or $8 million. My professional instincts, honed over 15 years of identifying undervalued and distressed assets, kicked into high gear. "Tell me more about Meridian's financial situation," I said. Over the following days, Samuel connected me with former colleagues in the banking world who provided discreet, off-the-record insights. Meridian was indeed on the brink. They had maxed out their credit lines and were frantically selling land holdings to avoid bankruptcy. The lake property, appraised at around $300,000, was one of their few remaining unencumbered assets. Meanwhile, Merrick had been quietly organizing small gatherings with other disgruntled residents. We met in rotating locations: Samuel's study, a private library room, the back of a sympathetic local bakery. The stories shared were variations on a theme of targeted harassment. James Morris, a retired teacher, recounted, "She cited me for excessive holiday decorations the day after I spoke against her at a town council meeting. I'd had the same Christmas lights for 15 years. But suddenly they violated a brand new brightness ordinance." Maria Gonzalez, a healthcare worker with 3 foster children, shared, "My kids were banned from the community pool for being too loud. On the same day, Karen's grandchildren wanted the pool to themselves. When I asked which specific rule they broke, she said it was her executive decision as HOA President." Diana Winters, a young widow, described a mosquito inspection Karen personally led in her backyard. 2 days later, I had violation notices for 5 different issues, all things my neighbors have but were never cited for. When I pointed this out, Karen suggested that perhaps this community isn't the right fit for someone in your situation. Each story painted a picture of a tactical, systematic campaign: identify opposition, apply pressure through the HOA rulebook, and force either submission or departure. Those who stayed learned silence. Those who fought found the harassment escalating. Through these meetings, our coalition grew. Samuel established a secure, encrypted messaging group where residents could share information safely. We were building a resistance cell right under Karen's nose. I also began digging into Karen's personal finances. Despite her curated image of success, Wellington Properties was swimming in debt. She had multiple lines of credit taken out against her own properties, likely to fund her lifestyle and her acquisition attempts. The lake development wasn't just a profit opportunity. It was a financial necessity. "She's overextended," I explained to Merrick and Samuel during a strategy session. "This isn't just about greed. It's about survival. If the lake deal falls through, she's in serious trouble." This made her both more dangerous and more vulnerable. Samuel suggested I speak with Robert Chen, a real estate broker with deep local market knowledge. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles away for privacy. "Karen's been trying to put together financing to buy the lake for about $300,000, Robert confirmed in a low voice. "Meridian is desperate for a quick close. They've given her a 60-day exclusive window, but they're so cash-strapped they'd likely accept a better, all-cash offer immediately." He leaned closer. "Her real estate empire is mostly smoke and mirrors. She's leveraged to the hilt, using her HOA connections to maintain a facade. She's about 3 bad months away from collapse. That's why she's so aggressive about this lake. She needs a big win to keep her creditors from calling in her loans. With this intelligence, my plan crystallized. I had the capital to make an immediate, all-cash offer that Meridian couldn't refuse. The key was timing. "We need to wait," Samuel advised, his strategic mind mirroring my own. "Let her announce her special assessment for lake improvements. Let her commit herself publicly, spend her political capital with the community, and her financial capital with her backers. Then we pull the rug out," Merrick agreed. "The more she invests in this publicly, emotionally, financially, reputationally, the more devastating the blow when she fails. And the more likely the community will turn on her when they realize they've been manipulated." We maintained absolute secrecy about our endgame. To Karen's network of informants, we were just a grumbling group of residents documenting HOA overreach. She knew we were meeting, evidenced by a sudden spike in petty violations against our members, but she had no idea of our true objective. Robert Chen arranged a discreet meeting with Tom Branson. the Meridian executive handling the lake sale. We met in a private conference room in a downtown law firm. "Look, I'll be straight with you," Tom said after the introductions. "We've given Wellington Properties an exclusive negotiation period, but there's a clause that lets us entertain other offers if they come with a guaranteed rapid closing. Karen's still scrambling to pull investors together, but we need cash now." "What's her offer?" I asked. "300,000 paid over 18 months with a complicated financing structure," Tom replied, his frustration evident. "Our board is pushing for immediate liquidation." I made my move. "I can offer 350,000. All cash, closing in 7 days. Tom's eyes widened. "That would certainly get my board's attention," he said, clearly startled by the directness and size of the offer. "But I should warn you, Karen Wellington has friends in City Hall. She won't take this lying down." "I'm counting on it," I replied with a thin smile. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement in hand, contingent only on a standard environmental assessment. The purchasing entity was listed as Thorncraft Holdings, LLC, a new company I'd created. Unless Karen dug deep into corporate registries, she wouldn't connect it to me. As I worked in the background, Karen's harassment of me intensified. Violation notices appeared for infractions that had never been mentioned before. Improper weed control, unauthorized landscaping, materials, my mailbox height violation, and even a citation for my garage door being the wrong shade of taupe, despite it being the exact color approved when I purchased the home. The fines piled up, another $100, another $200. Within 2 weeks, I'd accumulated nearly $2,000 in penalties. My appeals were lost or denied without hearing. Then came a more disturbing incident. Celine had left her bicycle in the driveway for 15 minutes while she ran inside to answer the phone. A violation notice, complete with time-stamped photographs, was taped to our door within the hour. Someone was watching our house, waiting for any minor misstep. The campaign wasn't limited to me. Maria Gonzalez was fined for her lawn being a 1/4 inch too high, measured personally by Karen. James Morris was cited for a bird feeder that had been in his yard for a decade. Diana Winters received a notice for improper trash disposal when her recycling bin was 6 inches too close to her garage. It was a transparent intimidation tactic, but it backfired spectacularly. Instead of scaring people away, each new absurd violation drove another resident into our coalition. Soon, our messaging group included representatives from nearly 30 households. The final straw came when Selene returned from school in tears. "The kids at school are saying we're troublemakers," she sobbed. "Brianna said her mom told her we're trying to bring down property values and that we don't belong here." Brianna's mother was one of Karen's staunchest allies on the HOA board. The battle had now extended to my child. That night, after Selene was asleep, I called Merrick, feeling defeated. "I'm thinking about selling and moving. This is affecting Selene too much." "That's exactly what she wants," Merrick replied, his voice firm. "She's done this to at least 6 other families. She hounds them until they sell low, and then her shell companies scoop up the properties. Don't give her that satisfaction, Remy." He was right. Leaving would mean Karen won, and it would teach Selene the worst possible lesson about confronting bullies. That same evening, I received the call I'd been waiting for. The environmental assessment was clean, and Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The paperwork was ready for signing. Later, while reviewing the HOA governing documents one more time, I discovered a critical detail. Karen's proposed special assessment to fund the lake improvements required a 75% homeowner approval, not the simple majority she had claimed. She was attempting to bypass her own rules, confident no one would challenge her. That was the moment everything crystallized. They've brought this fight to my daughter, I thought, a cold, focused calm settling over me. Time to show them what happens when you anger someone who spent his career learning how to break down and rebuild systems. The next morning, I withdrew the funds. Samuel, in a show of incredible solidarity, offered to loan me an additional $50,000 to ensure we had overwhelming financial leverage. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was signed. The lake, all 6 acres and its 10-foot shoreline perimeter, now belonged to me. The timing was perfect. The day after I closed the deal, Karen held a special HOA meeting to unveil her grand vision for our lake. She had even hired an architecture firm to create renderings that, based on the previews I'd seen, included reducing the water area by 20% to make room for a members-only lakeside lounge that would have eliminated the fishing docks. I kept my ownership absolutely secret, sharing the news only with Merrick and Samuel. At the meeting, Karen stood at the podium before a PowerPoint presentation titled Elevating Lakeside Estates, a Premier Vision. She spent 20 minutes describing how her strategic reimagining would boost property values and community prestige, never mentioning that her own company would develop and sell the new luxury homes. She also launched a thinly veiled smear campaign against me, referring to certain new elements who don't understand our values and financially unstable individuals trying to undermine property values. Samuel bravely stood to defend me, only to be publicly humiliated by Karen, who dredged up a long-resolved tax issue from his past. "I find it interesting," she said with mock sweetness, "that Mr. Washington feels qualified to lecture us about community standards when he himself had to negotiate with the IRS over unpaid taxes a few years ago. Perhaps we should focus on getting our own houses in order before criticizing others." When Sapphira Dusklund, a timid board member, tentatively suggested a community vote might be appropriate, Karen fixed her with an icy stare. "Sapphira, I believe the flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? It would be a shame if there were any complications with that." The threat was unmistakable, and Sapphira immediately fell silent. Watching this display, I felt a profound calm. She had no idea her kingdom was already crumbling. Karen then used her connection with Mayor James Wilson to apply administrative pressure. My house was subjected to random safety inspections, and questions were raised about permits for renovations done by the previous owner years ago. The pressure was intense, and when Selene came home crying again after being ostracized at school, I nearly broke. But then the call came. Meridian's lawyer confirmed that Karen had been informed the lake was sold to an anonymous third party, and all negotiations with her were terminated. Within hours, she was on my doorstep, her composure shattered. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal?" I smiled pleasantly. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. Though I did hear the lake property was sold. I hope the HOA has a good relationship with the new owner." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without our approval." "I think you should check the terms of that agreement," I replied, my voice even. "From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is at the sole discretion of the property owner." A flicker of panic crossed her face before she masked it with anger. "The community won't stand for this. We'll sue for right of access." "Good luck with that," I said, still smiling as I gently closed the door in her face. The following 24 hours were a spectacle of desperation. Karen called emergency closed-door board meetings, frantically trying to identify the new owner and exploring legal strategies. She even enlisted Mayor Wilson to investigate zoning restrictions and eminent domain possibilities, all of which Merrick confirmed were legally baseless. A week later, Karen decided to make her boldest statement yet, a massive original homeowners lakeside party, conspicuously excluding newer residents like me, to assert our community rights. The event was in full swing. Catered food, a live band, wine bars. When I arrived with Merrick, Samuel, my attorney, and a local police officer I had briefed. As about 60 residents mingled and drank, I walked to the center of the party and picked up Karen's microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake." Karen rushed over, her face flushed with wine and fury. "This is a private community event." "You weren't invited." "Actually, Karen," I said, holding the microphone firmly, "I think there's been some confusion about who should be inviting whom." I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document. As the legal owner of this lake and all surrounding property within 10 feet of the shoreline, I'm informing you that you are all currently trespassing on private property." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Karen's face went from red to a blotchy purple. "What are you talking about?" "This is HOA—" "No, Karen, it never was," I interrupted calmly, holding up the deed for all to see. "It belonged to Meridian Development until 3 days ago when I purchased it outright. And effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement." I gestured to the police officer. "I've asked Officer Reynolds here to help ensure an orderly departure from my property. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave." The look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, as if the world had just reversed its rotation. "You can't do this. The community has rights.